I thought the best thing in the world would be to be a freighter dog flying a Twin Beech in the middle of the night. And I had no idea just exactly how bad that job would be when I got it. Probably flew 3,500 hours worth of Part 135 freight. And I started with a little company called, it was not such a little company, and then it was called California Air Charter. Now it's called Ameriflight, and they're the largest 135 operator in the country. But when I went to work for them in 1983, it was out of Oakland base, and they had Piper Lances and Cherokee Arrows, and you know, if you're a real big dog, you got to fly the Piper Chieftain, you know, the Navajo, and later on they got Beech 99s, and I left there after about a year and a half, and in disgust, I was so mad at the company, I just said I'd had it, and then I went back to flight instructing for a little while, and there was a guy that started an outfit out of Hayward, where I'm from, and he had Cessna 404s, and his wages were so pathetic. Every time I go in there and talk to him, he just said, "I'm really looking for people," and I'm thinking, well, that price, you ought to be looking for people because you're not paying enough to live. And anyway, I ultimately went to work for him, and he got another Chieftain, and flew Cessna 404s for a while, and then this whole thing with the Beech 18s started because when I was a little boy, my best friend Chucky Potter, his dad flew freight in a Twin Beech. And even before I was diagnosed with overactive airplane hormone, the family went on a vacation to go with Dad, and he flew from San Luis Obispo to Salinas to San Francisco every night in a Twin Beech. And we lived in the Bay Area, and my friend Chucky told me that they were going down to San Luis Obispo and they're going to hang with Dad. And we're going to hang with Dad and get to ride in the Twin Beech, and I just practically invited myself to go and said, "You just got to take me with this thing." And anyway, I talked him into it, and we went down there and met his dad, who was a pretty serious-minded fella. But the whole family piled into this Beech 18 with mail up to the gunnels, and in turn, each one of us kids got to go up in the co-pilot seat, and you know, and for lack of a mentor that had any better sense, all through high school, I thought the best thing in the world would be to be a freighter dog flying a Twin Beech in the middle of the night. And I had no idea just exactly how bad that job would be when I got it. And I've had a lot of flying jobs, but that Twin Beech job was maybe the worst job I ever had as a pilot. And it was a 1945 C-45H that I flew. And I started working with this guy that had a E-model 18, and he was kind of a rogue guy, you know, had no use for the FAA. Airplane was unpainted except for tape for the numbers. He had a different sensibility about maintenance than I remember feeling really comfortable with. One time we came in and he didn't have one brake, which you know, just scares the dickens out of me, knowing what I know about Twin Beeches now. Without one brake, you could be in real trouble. He was a pretty good Twin Beech driver, but I'd rather just fix the brake. Anyway, and I was with him one time. We were I spent about a week with him, kind of checking me out, and I have to back up a little bit. I was a tail dragger guy from the get-go, so I learned to fly in a Citabria, and I ended up teaching at a school that did aerobatic instruction and decathlons and Great Lakes and pit specials, and had a low-level waiver in a pits, and I'd flown a lot of tailwheel airplanes, and I remember sitting in the hero chair of a Twin Beech and thinking, well, how hard could it be? I mean, you could see out of it. Because that made some tailwheel airplanes really hard, because now you're looking over the noses so you can't see. So I got in the Twin Beech and I thought, the visibility is great. I mean, I'd never flown an airplane of the same ilk as a Twin Beech. So when I got in the Twin Beech, I could fly it straight away, right? I mean, I had no issue with flying the airplane, except what I didn't know, and what wasn't really taught to me very well by the guy who was sort of checking me out, was that once in a while a Twin Beech would have a tendency to go for the weeds, and unless you know how to, it isn't just the usual see a saw on the rudder to get the airplane back straight again. There was a combination of opposite aileron and engines and brakes, and you kind of had to know the combination. And that was a specific thing to twin Beeches and some other airplanes of the same ilk, like to a lesser degree a DC-3, a C-46. C-46 guys, you know, that's a lot of airplane to get sideways. So anyway, it was not until I was flying the airplane for a while that I remember going into Los Angeles with a heavy load of freight in the back, and the airplane just got in a gust, and I did everything I knew to get the airplane straight again, and it scared the dickens out of me. I got it back together, but it was like, oh my goodness. And then my eyes were that big around for every landing after that. And I always sort of joked, you know, back in the Navajo days, you know, the chieftain pilots making sure the boost pumps are on, you know. The Twin Beech guys pumping the brakes to make sure the brakes are working. Okay, here we go. There was a certain amount of pucker on every landing, and when you first get in the thing, you want to take it to Edwards where you have enough runway to deal with. Not like it would have made much difference if you don't know what you're doing, but I saw people that were, you know, real skilled Twin Beech people that could take it into a real narrow sidewalk of a strip and land on a 2,500-foot runway, and you know, that takes, to a much greater degree than other proletariat little airplanes, that takes a real degree of skill and practice. And
almost an art form then.
well, I mean, it's you know, in most light twin engine airplanes, you know, a person gets a multi-engine rating and they might just fly the airplane once a month or twice a month or 3 times a month, but it'd probably take a person 100 hours in the airplane of consistent flying the airplane before they kind of, okay, I think I got this. And they're flying at IFR, and they can really get out of the airplane the utility out of the airplane. And the Twin Beech is probably more like, I mean, it's an easy airplane to fly IFR. I mean, are you a pilot? Are you? Okay, well, flying the airplane by reference to instruments, some airplanes are really challenging, but a Twin Beech is a big kiddie car on instruments. But then you have to land it. It's different to have to land it. And so anyway, the Twin Beech, by the time you learned all of its tricks, you'd probably have to spend 500 hours, you know, maybe a year of working the airplane every day and dealing with that nasty crosswind. And it wasn't particularly a hard crosswind airplane. It was just hard all the time. It wasn't, you know, some airplanes are really hard in a crosswind. Twin Beech wasn't so bad in a crosswind, but it was hard all the time. So you never really let your guard down.
What's the appeal of a Twin Beech 18 to you?
Well, I tell people it was, you know, for me, looking back, I kind of saw it as a rite of passage. You know, some of the older pilots with whom I'm privileged to have known sort of let me know that, you know, no amount of Cessna 310 time will ever amount to 2 hours in a Twin Beech, and partly because of the reasons I've spoken of being able to, you know, it's if you took a kid who grew up in Cessnas and Pipers who never had any similar or any tailwheel experience, they would just be amazed at how difficult the airplane is to get just to the runway, because there's all manner of locking and unlocking a tailwheel, and sometimes, you know, in a cold weather you have to sit and bypass the oil coolers to get the engines warm enough, and then turn the and then there's unlocking and locking the tail wheel and manipulating brakes and engines, and it's quite a monkey motion just to get the darn thing to the runway, let alone fly it. Once you're airborne, though, it's a big kiddie car, and it's like most Beech products, silky ball bearing controls. You fly the airplane with 3 fingers and light touch on the pedals, and an easy airplane to manipulate on the controls. And as a pilot's airplane, it had great visibility, and what I always liked about it was it had the throttle quadrant where the throttle's in the middle, which is where God intended. You know, and some nancy-pansy person decided to put the throttles on the left and the props. And so I like the throttles in the middle and the props on one side and the mixers on the other side. It makes it less like you're going to make a mistake if you had to shut an engine down, just my 2 cents. Anyway, throttles in the middle, plus it has oil shutter doors that have to be manipulated, and they can be manipulated in a way that makes really good control of the oil temperature. There's a duct in the leading edge of the wing, and the oil shutters have to be changed, and there's a couple of levers there, and you know, little airplanes have carburetor heat often. This had manifold heats, and in the icing conditions, you'd adjust the temperatures. You had temperature gauges for the carburetor, so you'd adjust them so they get warmer than freezing. And it had, you know, some models an extreme case would have 7 fuel tanks. And so there's always that fussing around with the 7 fuel tanks. You know, the one I flew mostly just had 5. And you had to, you know, fuel it according to carrying how much weight you could carry. So you'd tanker the gas in a way that you could carry the absolute most load. But then when you flew the airplane empty like that, whoa, little nose heavy. Because what else can I tell you? Anyway, it was a really cool airplane to fly, and it was the biggest airplane. I was a co-pilot on a DC-3 when I was a lad. In 1981, I flew fish in Alaska, a C-46 and a DC-3, and I had about 600 hours. And the guy I flew with would keep me right on the edge of saying, "I'll quit." He said, "You want this landing? You want to do it?" It's just a big carrot, you know, from the other side. And but I didn't have enough experience to appreciate what I was dealing with those bigger airplanes. I hated the DC-3. The window was like right up against your face, and I could never figure out what was straight to land the airplane, and I didn't have enough experience to know any better. And I remember landing, just hitting the ground hard, and my captain just pushing the yoke forward and slamming the airplane on the ground. And in the C-46, that was, I was flying the little Beech 18 guy in the C-46 and in the DC-3 for that matter, but he was a little edgy about the C-46 because, you know, it's 52,000 pound tail dragger. Same animal with, and it had expanded tube brakes. Anyway, I don't want to bore you with all that stuff. But it was, it came at a time in my career when I didn't have the seasoning to really appreciate what I was dealing with, and I didn't have that kind of confidence that, you know, I'd like to get in a, that's right. I'd like to get in a DC-3 or a C-46 and try my hand at it again now that I have some seasoning and have 30,000 hours now. And so I retired from American Airlines in April a year ago. So, but anyway, it was a rite of passage. It was a really, real cool airplane to fly with all the stuff in it. And when I got my act together and felt like I could fly the thing and do my job every night, it was a interesting job. But it was maybe the most lonesome lifestyle I'd ever lived. And I had a girlfriend who lent me Chuck Yeager's first book, right? And Chuck Yeager was he's a fellow that needed no image. He had a pretty good self-image, and it was certainly evident in that book. And but what I appreciated, I was flying like 35 hours a week. And that was not even legal. I was flying over the FAR, which is a maximum of 30 hours a week. So I was working 6 nights a week. I'd go from Hayward to San Francisco International, try to keep my mail bags from blowing away by helicopters that were air taxiing in, and stuff the airplane full of stuff until I could just barely get the, you know, you had to kind of weight the stuff toward the front of the airplane, and you get around the leading edge of the door, and you know, get everything strapped in pretty good, and then and launch out of San Francisco. You had to be really particularly wary of, you know, I was the littlest airplane going into San Francisco International, and at Twin Beech, when it's heavy, it's not a rocket. It's kind of a heavy machine, and if you got hit by a wake when you're heavy like that, it would be good night Irene. You'd just crash, and so you had to be thinking about which way the wind's blowing and which way you're going to turn to avoid that wake, and you had to be on your head on a swivel going in and out of there.